I never expected to find anything life-changing 40 feet below sea level. The dive center in Sahara had promised visibility to rival the Caribbean, but as I adjusted my mask and felt the cool water rushing around my wetsuit, I was more interested in the alleged shipwreck than any human encounter. "Last one in buys drinks," I called to my dive buddy Trevor before descending, letting the ocean envelop me in its silent blue world. The shipwreck was exactly where the local guide had marked it, a small cargo vessel that had succumbed to a storm in the 1970s, now a sanctuary for marine life. I was photographing a particularly striking coral formation when movement caught my eye. Not fish, another diver. She moved with graceful precision, her slender form gliding through water as if gravity was optional. I hadn't expected another group today. The woman turned, her eyes widening behind her mask when she noticed me. Even underwater, I could see they were startlingly blue. She gestured toward an opening in the ship's hull I hadn't noticed. An invitation. Against my better judgment, I followed. Inside the hull, light filtered through in hazy beams, illuminating a perfectly preserved steering wheel, encrusted with barnacles but unmistakably vintage. She pointed excitedly, then pulled out an underwater slate and wrote, 1957 model, same as on land. I responded, "You know cars?" She nodded enthusiastically before swimming closer, her blonde hair floating around her mask like a halo. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that made me forget about my dwindling air supply. Back on the surface an hour later, I pulled off my mask to find her waiting on the dock, up close, without the distortion of water. She was even more striking, tall with high cheekbones and a smile that crinkled the corners of those blue eyes. "Catherine Martin," she said, extending her hand. Water droplets ran down her tanned arm. "Sorry for the impromptu buddy system down there." "Chloe Hall," I replied, taking her hand. It was warm despite the cold water. No apology needed. Not every day I meet someone who recognizes steering column designs underwater. She laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the already sunny day. "What can I say? Cars are my obsession. I collect them, actually." "You're kidding." I pulled off my wetsuit top, suddenly conscious of my plain one piece beneath. "I restore them. Classic cars, specifically." The coincidence seemed to delight her. She stepped closer, her voice dropping slightly. "I have a collection about 20 minutes from here. Several pieces that need experienced hands." The way she said experienced hands made my cheeks flush, and not from the sun. "Perhaps," she continued, pulling a business card from her dry bag, "you'd like to see them? Professionally speaking, of course." I took the card, noting the embossed lettering. "Catherine Martin, Vintage Automotive Collection." "I'd love to," I said, surprised by my own eagerness. As we parted ways to change, I found myself watching her walk away, her confident stride leaving wet footprints on the wooden dock. Trevor nudged me with a knowing grin. "Found something more interesting than the shipwreck?" "Maybe," I admitted, Catherine's card still between my fingers. Just maybe. Following the GPS directions to Catherine's address led me to what could only be described as an estate. A sprawling southwestern-style ranch house with 3 separate outbuildings that looked suspiciously like industrial-sized garages. The massive property stood isolated against the desert landscape, like a mirage of wealth and privilege. Catherine answered the door herself, transformed from the wetsuit-clad diver into someone who looked like she belonged on a magazine cover. Crisp white linen pants and a loose blue blouse that made her eyes seem impossibly bluer. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "Your cars sounded interesting." I tried to sound professional despite my racing pulse. "Oh, they're far more than interesting," she replied with a smile that suggested she knew exactly what effect she had on people. "They're intoxicating." The first garage door slid open with a mechanical hum, and lights flickered on automatically, illuminating what could only be described as automotive heaven. 20 classic cars arranged in chromatic order, from a cherry red 1955 Thunderbird convertible to a midnight black 1970 Dodge Challenger. "My God," I whispered, momentarily forgetting Catherine's presence. This is museum quality." "I prefer personal sanctuary," Catherine said, watching me with evident pleasure at my reaction. "Each one has a story. Each one saved me in some way." I moved slowly between the cars, letting my fingers hover just above pristine paint jobs, breathing in the mingled scents of leather, oil, and polish. "How did you start collecting?" I asked, stopping before a gorgeous 1963 Corvette Stingray. "My father restored cars. After he died, I bought the first one to feel close to him. Then another. Then," she gestured around, "it became something more." There was something intimate about the way she shared this, like showing me a secret part of herself. The professional distance I'd intended to maintain was already evaporating. "And this one," she said, leading me to the far corner, "is my latest acquisition." She pulled a cover off a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback that had seen better days. The Highland green paint was faded in patches, rust creeping around the wheel wells. "Bullet," I breathed. Catherine's eyes lit up. "You recognize the model?" "Everyone knows Bullet. McQueen made it legendary." I circled the car slowly. "She needs significant work. That's why you're here." Catherine leaned against the car, her posture relaxed but her gaze intense. "I need someone who understands preservation, not just restoration. Someone who sees the soul beneath the surface." Our conversation evolved from technical specifications to passionate debates about originality versus drivability. Hours passed unnoticed. Catherine was knowledgeable in a way few collectors were. She didn't just own these cars, she understood them. "I should go," I said eventually, noticing the desert sunset through the windows. "Or you could stay for dinner," Catherine countered. "We could discuss the Mustang project further." Over a bottle of ridiculously expensive wine and takeout from what Catherine claimed was the best Italian restaurant in Sahara, we hammered out restoration plans. When our hands accidentally brushed as we both reached for the last breadstick, I felt a jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. "I think this is the beginning of something beautiful," Catherine said softly, her eyes holding mine. She leaned forward slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. Her lips tasted like wine and possibility, the kiss brief but unmistakably charged with promise. "The car," she clarified with a mischievous smile as she pulled back. "I meant the restoration," but we both knew she didn't. The Mustang restoration became my obsession. Catherine cleared space in her third garage, creating what she called Chloe's workshop, a dream setup with proper lighting, hydraulic lifts, and tools that made my regular equipment look like children's toys. "Don't you have other cars to restore?" Trevor asked when I canceled our weekly drinks for the third time. "This isn't just any car," I answered, not adding that it wasn't just any client either. Catherine and I fell into a comfortable routine. I'd arrive early afternoons and often work until midnight, peeling back layers of the Mustang's history. Catherine would join me after handling her investment firm business, bringing dinner and staying to hand me tools or simply watch. "You're different when you work," she observed one night, perched on a stool nearby, wineglass in hand. "Like you're having a conversation no one else can hear." "Cars talk if you listen," I replied, wiping grease from my hands. "This one's had a rough life. Previous owner tried covering rust with body filler instead of properly repairing it." Catherine nodded. "People do that too. Cover damage instead of healing it." The comment hung in the air, oddly personal. I'd noticed Catherine was like the cars she collected. Beautiful, meticulously maintained on the outside, but with hints of complicated history beneath. "Hand me that socket wrench?" I asked, breaking the moment. She slid off her stool and stepped closer than necessary to pass it to me. Our fingers touched longer than they needed to. These small contacts had become frequent, a hand on my shoulder when she leaned in to see what I was doing, our shoulders brushing as we stood side by side examining engine parts. One night, working late under the hood, I felt her presence behind me before she spoke. "You've got something." Her voice was soft as she reached up to brush metal filings from my hair. Her hand lingered, trailing down to my neck. I froze. Socket wrench suspended mid-air, hardly daring to breathe. "Sorry," she murmured, withdrawing. "Distracted you." "It's okay," I managed, turning to face her. The garage suddenly felt very small. "I don't mind." Something vulnerable flickered in her expression. "I'm not very good at this, letting people close." "Is that what we're doing?" I asked carefully. "I think so." She looked away. "After Ellen left, I promised myself I'd stick to cars. They don't leave when things get complicated." "Ellen?" Catherine sighed, setting down her wine glass. My ex-wife. We built the collection together, actually. Until she decided our partnership wasn't working, business or personal. I'm sorry. Don't be. 5 years of therapy and I'm almost over it. Her attempt at humor didn't quite reach her eyes. The divorce settlement was ugly. She wanted half the cars. What happened? I kept them. She got the house in Malibu and enough money to buy her own damn collection. Catherine's voice hardened. She claimed I was obsessive, controlling. Maybe she was right. Is that why you keep people at a distance? I asked, moving closer. Mostly. Her fingers tangled absently in a clean rag on the workbench. And you? What's your excuse for spending every night with an old car instead of dating? Who says I'm not dating? I countered with a small smile. Are you? Something like genuine concern crossed her face. Instead of answering, I took her hand. It was soft compared to mine, which were calloused from years of restoration work. She looked down at our joined hands with an expression of wonder, as if this simple contact was more intimate than anything she'd experienced in years. I'm here every night because I want to be, I said quietly. When she looked up, the walls she'd carefully maintained were momentarily down. I saw loneliness there, and a cautious hope that made my heart ache. It's getting late, she whispered, though neither of us moved apart. Yes, I agreed, still holding her hand. It is. She's ready for a test drive, I announced, wiping grease from my hands after weeks of restoration work on the Mustang. Catherine looked up from her laptop, eyes widening. Already? I thought you said the transmission needed. Found a period-correct replacement from a collector in Phoenix, I said, unable to hide my pride. Installed it yesterday while you were at your board meeting. She closed her laptop and approached the car, running her fingers along the freshly polished fender. She's beautiful, Chloe. Want to take her out? I dangled the keys. There's a scenic route through the desert I've been wanting to try. 20 minutes later, we were racing along empty roads, the Mustang's engine growling beneath us. Catherine sat in the passenger seat, window down, her black hair whipping around her face as she laughed with genuine abandon. I'd never seen her so unguarded. Pull over, she called suddenly, pointing to a viewpoint ahead. I guided the Mustang onto the gravel overlook. Below us stretched miles of desert, painted in burnt orange and deep purple as the sun began its descent. Worth the restoration? I asked. Instead of answering, Catherine leaned across the center console and kissed me. Not the cautious kiss from weeks before, but something hungry and certain. When she pulled back, her blue eyes held mine with intensity. Very much worth it, she whispered. The darkening sky went unnoticed until the first fat raindrops hit the windshield. Rain? In the desert? I looked up, confused. Monsoon season, Catherine explained. These storms come out of nowhere. We should head back. But nowhere became everywhere within minutes. The desert sky opened up, visibility dropping to almost zero as rain pounded the Mustang. Wind rocked the car, and sand swirled in blinding sheets across the road. There's a motel up ahead, Catherine pointed through the storm. We should wait it out. The Desert Palms Motel had seen better days, probably sometime in the 1970s. The neon sign flickered weakly as we dashed from the car, already soaked despite the short distance. One room left, the disinterested clerk informed us, sliding a key across the counter. Storms brought everyone in off the highway. The room was small, with one queen bed and decor straight from a time capsule. We stood awkwardly, dripping on the carpet, the unspoken question hanging between us. I can sleep in the chair, I offered. Catherine's laugh was soft as she stepped closer. Don't be ridiculous. Her fingers traced my cheek. Unless you want to. I don't, I admitted, my voice barely audible over the rain hammering the roof. Her kiss tasted like rainwater and anticipation. Clothing, damp and clinging, became obstacles easily overcome. There was none of the hesitation that had characterized our earlier interactions, only discovery and a hunger that seemed mutual and overwhelming. Hours later, with the storm still raging outside, we lay tangled in cheap motel sheets, Catherine's head on my chest. I didn't plan this, she murmured. The storm, or any of it? Her fingers traced patterns on my skin. You scare me, Chloe. Why? Because I collect things I can control, keep them perfect, preserved. She propped herself up to look at me. You can't be added to a collection. No, I agreed, brushing damp hair from her face. I can't. She kissed me again, softer this time, before settling back against me. I listened to her breathing even out as she drifted into sleep, wondering what exactly I'd gotten myself into. Morning came with harsh desert sunlight and an empty space beside me in bed. For a moment, I thought Catherine had left entirely, but then I heard her voice outside. Through the thin curtains, I could see her pacing beside the Mustang, phone pressed to her ear, her posture tense. I'll handle it, she was saying. No, that's not necessary. I said I'll handle it. When she returned, her walls were back up, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. We should head back, she said, gathering her things with efficient movements. I have meetings. The drive back was silent, the easy intimacy of the night before replaced by something I couldn't quite define. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already reaching for the door handle. Catherine, I started, not sure what I wanted to say. I'll call you, she said, and was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone in the car we'd restored together, wondering what had just broken between us. Catherine didn't call. For 3 days I waited, checking my phone obsessively, drafting and deleting texts that ranged from casual to desperate. On the 4th day, I buried myself in a new restoration project, determined to push thoughts of blue eyes and desert motels aside. The envelope arrived on day 5, plain white, no return address, delivered by courier to my workshop downtown. I assumed it was the final payment for the Mustang restoration, but inside was nothing but a single car key. No note, no explanation, just a vintage key with a Thunderbird logo. I stared at it, running my fingers over its worn teeth. Catherine had a '57 Thunderbird in her collection, but this couldn't be for that car. Those keys were kept in a climate-controlled display case, along with the car's original documentation. I tried calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left what I hoped was a professional message. Got your delivery, not sure what it means. Call me back. She didn't. A week after the motel, Trevor convinced me to join him for drinks at our regular bar. You're moping, he observed, sliding a whiskey toward me. The car lady? Catherine, I corrected, then sighed. We had a moment, then nothing. Define moment, he pressed. I took a long drink instead of answering. Ah, he nodded sagely. The classic desert storm, one-night stand, mysterious disappearance, tale as old as time. It wasn't like that. But even as I protested, doubt crept in. What did I really know about Catherine Martin beyond her cars and her money? The next morning, my phone finally rang with her number. I need to reschedule our follow-up maintenance on the Mustang, she said without preamble, her voice distant and professional. Catherine, what's going on? You sent me a key. I didn't send anything. The sharpness in her tone surprised me. I've been dealing with some business complications. The Mustang maintenance will have to wait. And us? I asked, hating the vulnerability in my voice. Is that on hold too? A long pause. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have let things get personal. A mistake, I repeated, my chest tightening. Right. I'm sorry, Chloe. I have another call. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone, then at the mysterious key still sitting on my workbench. Something wasn't adding up. That afternoon, I drove to her estate, determined to get answers. The security gate was locked, and no one answered the intercom. After waiting 15 minutes, I was about to leave when an older model Mercedes pulled up behind me. A man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair rolled down his window. She won't be back until late. Board meeting in Phoenix. You know Catherine? I asked. He smiled thinly. I'm her caretaker, Marcus. He looked me over. You must be the car girl. I recognize the truck. Chloe? I confirmed. I need to talk to her about this. I held up the key. Marcus's expression changed, something like concern crossing his features. Where did you get that? Someone sent it to my shop. I thought it was Catherine, but it wasn't. He glanced at the house. You should come in. Marcus led me through the main house to Catherine's study, a room I'd never entered before. It was meticulously organized, with architectural drawings of her garages framed on one wall and photographs of cars on another. This isn't the first blank envelope, Marcus said, opening a desk drawer and removing a small box. Inside were 3 car keys, each one tagged with a date. They started coming 3 weeks ago. What do they mean? I don't know. But they're connected to something Catherine won't discuss. She gets agitated when they arrive. I picked up one of the keys. These are all for different models: Ford, Chevrolet, now Thunderbird. The timing of these deliveries coincides with business meetings being canceled, Catherine changing security codes, strange phone calls. Marcus looked worried. And now she's canceling her restoration work with you. Has she said anything? Only that the past is catching up with her. He returned the keys to the drawer. I've worked for Miss Martin for 12 years. I've never seen her rattled like this. As I drove home, the blank envelope and mysterious key weighed heavily on my mind. Catherine's sudden coldness, her abrupt withdrawal, it felt less like rejection and more like fear. Whatever was happening, it had started before our night in the desert. And something told me it was far from over. The mystery of the blank envelopes consumed me. I spent a week researching Catherine's business dealings, finding nothing but glowing profiles of her investment success and car collection. No scandals, no lawsuits, nothing to explain her sudden retreat or the mysterious keys. I was organizing receipts when the bell above my shop door jingled. A woman in her 40s entered, tailored pantsuit, sharp bob haircut, and an air of barely contained hostility. Chloe Hall? She didn't wait for confirmation. I'm Diane Reeves. I was Catherine Martin's business partner for 8 years. Was? I set down my paperwork. Until she forced me out last year. Diane surveyed my modest workshop with undisguised judgment. So you're her latest project. The way she emphasized project made my spine stiffen. I restored a car for her. Diane laughed without humor. Sure, a car. That's how it starts. What do you want, Miss Reeves? She approached my workbench, fingertips trailing along the surface. To warn you, Catherine has a pattern. She finds something or someone, becomes obsessed, then destroys it when she loses interest. That's not my experience with her. Not yet. Diane's smile was cold. First comes the extravagant attention. She'll give you access to her world, make you feel special. Then come the gifts, the intimacy, the promises. My face must have betrayed something because Diane nodded knowingly. Already there, are we? Then you're right on schedule for the next phase, isolation. Has she started canceling plans, making excuses, acting paranoid? The accuracy of her words left me momentarily speechless. Catherine collects more than cars, Diane continued. She collects people, experiences, emotions, then discards them when they no longer serve her narrative. Why tell me this? Professional courtesy. She placed a business card on my bench. When it all goes sideways, and it will, call me. I'm putting together a case against her business practices. After she left, I crumpled her card but couldn't bring myself to throw it away. That evening, I was testing a client's rebuilt carburetor when my phone lit up with Catherine's name. I nearly dropped my tools rushing to answer. Can we talk? Her voice was softer than during our last conversation. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you come to the house tomorrow? There's something I need to explain. Before I could respond, the carburetor I'd been working on sputtered violently, then died, despite having been perfectly calibrated 10 minutes earlier. I examined it closely, finding a tiny metal filing where it definitely shouldn't be. The next morning, I received an angry call from another client. The vintage Ferrari I'd tuned last month had developed catastrophic engine problems overnight. Then another call came, and another. 3 different cars I'd worked on, all experiencing mysterious mechanical failures. By the time I arrived at Catherine's estate, I was fuming. Marcus let me in silently, his expression grave. I found Catherine in her study, looking smaller somehow, shadows beneath her eyes suggesting sleepless nights. You need to explain what's happening, I demanded without preamble. She looked up, startled. I was going to. The blank envelopes. Not just the envelopes. My clients' cars are failing. Cars I restored or repaired. My reputation is being systematically destroyed. What? Genuine confusion crossed her face. I don't understand. 3 different cars all experiencing identical problems. Too precise for coincidence. You think I'm responsible? The hurt in her voice seemed authentic, But after my conversation with Diane, I wasn't sure what to believe. I think someone is, and it started when we got closer. I paced her study. Your ex-business partner visited me yesterday, said you have a pattern of obsession followed by destruction. Catherine's face drained of color. Diane came to see you? She was very informative about your projects, and you believed her. It wasn't a question but a defeated statement. I don't know what to believe anymore. I stopped pacing to look at her directly. All I know is that since the motel, everything's falling apart. If you're behind this— I'm not, Catherine interrupted, suddenly standing. I would never. Chloe, I've been afraid to get close to you because my past has a way of poisoning my present, but I would never sabotage you. She crossed the room, taking my hands in hers. Her touch, familiar yet now charged with uncertainty, made my resolve waver. I've been scared, she whispered, blue eyes searching mine. The envelopes, the keys, they're warnings. From someone who wants me to remember I don't deserve happiness. In that moment, she looked so vulnerable that all my suspicions felt cruel. I wanted to believe her, wanted it desperately. Then help me understand, I said finally. No more secrets. Catherine's explanation would have to wait. My phone rang, Trevor's number flashing urgently. Chloe, you need to get to your shop now. His voice was tight with panic. There's a fire. The drive back to town passed in a blur, Catherine insisting on coming with me. We arrived to find 3 fire trucks, billowing smoke, and my life's work transformed into a charred skeleton. The acrid smell of burnt rubber and melted metal hung in the air like a requiem. No, I whispered, stumbling from the car. A firefighter caught my arm before I could run toward the still smoldering building. Nothing we could do, he explained grimly. It was well underway when we got the call, nobody hurt, at least. I stood frozen, watching water stream from broken windows. Every tool I'd collected over 15 years, every project, every client's trust, gone. Catherine's hand found mine, squeezing tight. I'm so sorry, Chloe. The fire marshal approached hours later, his expression confirming my worst fears before he spoke. Definitely arson, he said, flipping through notes. Accelerant used, strategic ignition points, professional job. Professional? Catherine's voice sharpened. The marshal nodded. Security cameras disabled first. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I barely processed the insurance questions, the police statement, the sympathetic pats on my shoulder. By sunset, I was sitting on the curb across from my destroyed workshop, numb and hollow. You'll stay with me tonight, Catherine said, not a question but a statement. You shouldn't be alone. Too exhausted to argue, I let her drive me back to her estate. Marcus prepared a guest room, brought tea I didn't drink, and tactfully withdrew. This is because of me, Catherine said once we were alone. She paced the spacious living room like a caged animal. First the keys, then your client's cars, now this. She's escalating. She? I looked up. You know who's doing this? Catherine stopped pacing, shoulders slumping in defeat. My ex-wife, Ellen. The blank envelopes are her signature, a reminder of the day she served me divorce papers. But why target me? Because you matter to me. Catherine's voice cracked. And Ellen can't stand that I might be happy without her. The confession hung between us, both tender and terrifying. I should have been furious that her past had destroyed my present, but all I felt was bone-deep exhaustion. What did the keys mean? I asked finally. Each represents a car from our collection that held special meaning. Catherine sank onto the couch beside me. The night we met, she would have seen us together at the dive site. She's been watching, waiting. Why didn't you tell me? Warn me? I thought I was protecting you by pulling away. I've spent 2 years hiding from her vengeance. When we connected, I panicked. Ellen has resources, contacts. She once threatened that if I ever found someone new. Catherine didn't need to finish. The smoldering ruins of my workshop completed the sentence. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, I forgot the devastation, then reality crashed back. My livelihood was ashes. I had nothing. I found Catherine in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and intense. She ended the call when she saw me. I've hired security, she announced. And my lawyer is seeking an emergency restraining order against Ellen. You think that will stop her? I asked, accepting the coffee she offered. No. Catherine's honesty was jarring. But it creates a paper trail when she violates it. I should go, I said, suddenly uncomfortable with her efficiency, her wealth making this crisis seem manageable when my world was in ruins. Go where? Catherine challenged. She burned down your business, Chloe. Your apartment could be next. The truth of her words hit me like physical pain. I had nowhere safe to go, no workshop to rebuild, no way to earn a living. My reputation with clients was destroyed. I can't stay here, I insisted weakly. Catherine moved closer, her hand gently cupping my cheek. Yes, you can. We'll figure this out together. Against my better judgment, I leaned into her touch. I'm scared, I admitted. Me too. She drew me into her arms, and I let myself be held, finding strange comfort in the shared fear. Her lips found mine, hesitant at first, then with growing urgency. The kiss carried apology, promise, and something that felt dangerously like hope. We'll make her pay, Catherine whispered against my mouth. I won't let her take anything else from us. Us. One small word with enormous implications. Standing in her kitchen, surrounded by luxury while my life smoldered across town, I wondered if there could ever truly be an us after this. Days at Catherine's estate blurred together. Insurance claims, police interviews, and client calls became my new routine, while Catherine worked tirelessly to track Ellen's movements through private investigators. We existed in a strange limbo, intimate yet guarded, sharing a home but cautious with our hearts. A week after the fire, Catherine entered the kitchen as I was making coffee, her expression unreadable. We found her, she announced. Ellen's been staying at the Desert Palms Motel under a false name. My stomach clenched at the mention of the motel where everything between us had changed. How? Credit card trail. She made a mistake. Catherine placed a folder on the counter. The investigators have everything we need for the police. Will they arrest her? They should. But Ellen has connections. We need to confront her ourselves, make her confess. The we surprised me. You want me to come? Catherine's eyes met mine. You deserve answers as much as I do. The drive to the motel was tense, Catherine gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. When we arrived, she hesitated before leaving the car. I haven't seen her in 2 years, she admitted quietly. Not since the final divorce hearing. I reached for her hand. We'll do this together. Room 14, ironically, just 3 doors down from where Catherine and I had spent our night together. Catherine knocked sharply, her composure remarkable despite the circumstances. The door opened to reveal a striking woman in her early 40s. Seeing her in person, I understood what had first attracted Catherine. Ellen radiated confidence and sophistication, but her eyes, cold and calculating, revealed something darker. Catherine. Ellen's smile was all teeth. What a surprise, and you've brought your mechanic. How domestic. It's over, Ellen, Catherine said evenly. We know about the envelopes, the sabotage, the fire. Ellen leaned against the doorframe, unruffled. Prove it. We have proof, I stepped forward. Security footage, financial records. Do you? Ellen's attention shifted to me, assessing. Or are you just repeating what Catherine's told you? She's quite convincing when she wants something. I should know. Let us in, Ellen, Catherine demanded. We need to talk. Surprisingly, Ellen stepped aside. The motel room was neat, with papers spread across the bed, documents I recognized immediately. Those are from my workshop, I said, moving closer. Client files, invoices, they should have burned. Ellen smiled thinly. I took what I needed before the unfortunate incident. Insurance fraud is so tedious to prove without proper documentation. Insurance fraud? I repeated, confused. What Ellen means, Catherine said tightly, is that she was planning to frame you. Make it look like you burned your own shop for the insurance money. Ellen clapped slowly. Still sharp as ever, darling. But that was just Plan B. Plan A was much simpler. Destroy your little girlfriend's reputation, then watch you swoop in to rescue her with your millions. The same way you rescued me. The implication hit me like a slap. I turned to Catherine. What is she talking about? Catherine looked pained. It's not what you think, isn't it? Ellen laughed. Catherine has a pattern, sweetheart. Find someone talented but struggling. Shower them with opportunity and affection. Then slowly take control, professionally, financially, emotionally. That's not what happened between us, Catherine insisted. No? Ellen picked up a document. Your workshop lease. Did you know Catherine bought the building 3 months ago? Before the fire? Before you even finished her precious Mustang? I felt sick. Is that true? Catherine's silence was answer enough. She was setting you up for dependency, Ellen continued. Just like she did with me in our gallery business. First, she's your client, then your lover, then your landlord, then your financial savior. Until one day you realize you can't breathe without her permission. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. You bought my building without telling me? I was going to give it to you, Catherine said desperately. As a surprise, to expand your business. After making me fall in love with you, I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. Ellen's cruel smile widened. And there it is. Hook, line, sinker. Catherine stepped toward me. Chloe, please. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I demanded, hurt transforming to anger. Was I just another acquisition? Before Catherine could answer, Ellen moved between us. She'll never change, Chloe. I nearly destroyed myself trying to make her see what she was doing. So you became the thing you hated, Catherine shot back. Controlling, manipulative, destructive. Ellen's composure cracked. You made me this way. Their voices faded to background noise as pieces clicked into place. Ellen's warnings, Catherine's secrets, my destroyed workshop. Both women had used me in their twisted game of emotional chess. Stop, I said quietly, then louder when they continued arguing. Stop. They fell silent, both turning to look at me. I'm leaving, I announced. You two deserve each other. 6 months is a long time to rebuild a life. The insurance money helped, but starting over at 32 wasn't in my plans. I'd found a small space on the outskirts of town, renamed my business Phoenix Restorations, and slowly regained clients through dogged determination and discounted rates. I hadn't spoken to Catherine since walking out of that motel room. Ellen had been arrested eventually, not for arson, but for credit card fraud related to her false identity. The charges wouldn't stick, but it had satisfied some small part of my need for justice. You've got mail, Trevor announced, dropping an envelope on my new workbench. Fancy paper? No return address? My heart stuttered until I saw the Sahara Classic Car Exhibition logo embossed on the corner. Not a blank envelope after all. They want me to showcase at the exhibition? I read in disbelief. The annual event was invitation only, featuring the most prestigious restoration specialists in the country. Trevor peered over my shoulder. All expenses paid, prime location, someone must like your work. I knew exactly who that someone was. Catherine's influence was written between every line of the invitation. I'm not going, I decided, tossing it aside. Are you insane? Trevor snatched it up. This could relaunch your career completely. Who cares if Catherine pulled strings? He was right, of course. Pride wouldn't pay my bills or rebuild my reputation. The exhibition hall was transformed into an automotive wonderland, with spotlights illuminating vehicles worth more than most people's homes. I stood beside my showcase piece, a 1965 Shelby Cobra I'd rescued from a barn in Arizona and painstakingly restored. Impressive work, came a familiar voice behind me. I turned to find Catherine, elegant in a tailored suit that matched her eyes. 6 months had only enhanced her beauty, though something had softened in her expression. Thank you for the invitation, I said formally. You earned it, she replied. Your restoration speaks for itself. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken questions and regrets. I sold my collection, she said suddenly. Most of it, anyway. This surprised me. Why? Ellen was right about one thing. I was using those cars as emotional substitutes, controlling what I could restore and preserve because I couldn't do the same with relationships. Her honesty was unexpected and disarming. What will you do now? I asked. I bought a commercial property. Former aircraft hangar, perfect for large-scale restoration work. She handed me a business card. Martin Hall Restorations, if you're interested. I stared at the card, my name alongside hers. You're offering me a job? A partnership, she corrected. Equal shares, separate finances. I provide the space and connections, you provide the expertise and client trust. We both sign off on major decisions. The proposition was professionally perfect, exactly what I'd need to truly rebuild. And personally? I asked carefully. That's separate, Catherine said. I've spent 6 months in therapy unpacking my control issues. I don't want to own you, Chloe. I want to love you. But I'll understand if that door is closed. People milled around us, admiring classic cars while I faced the most important restoration project of my life, rebuilding trust. I'd need reassurances, I said. Boundaries. Anything. And time. Catherine nodded. We have that now. As the exhibition continued around us, Catherine reached into her pocket and pulled out something that gleamed under the spotlights, a custom gear shift knob fashioned into a ring, the metal worked by hand. I made this, she said quietly. From the original shift knob of the Mustang we restored together. Not as a proposal, we're not ready for that yet, but as a promise. I'm not trying to collect you. I'm asking if we can restore what broke between us. The craftsmanship was beautiful, imperfect in the way only handmade things can be. Unlike the pristine cars in her former collection, this carried marks of effort, of learning. I'd like to try, I said finally, accepting the ring but placing it in my pocket rather than on my finger, starting with a drive. The following Sunday, we took the Mustang along the same desert route where everything had both begun and fallen apart. This time, no storm threatened the horizon. Where to? Catherine asked from the passenger seat, different from the controlling woman I'd met diving near a shipwreck almost a year ago. Somewhere new, I decided. We'll figure out the route together. As we drove into the open desert, the Mustang's engine humming beneath us, I realized some restorations aren't about returning something to its original condition. Sometimes they're about creating something stronger than what existed before, patching weaknesses, reinforcing foundations, and knowing which original flaws to preserve as character rather than erase. Catherine's hand found mine on the gearshift, and I didn't pull away. Some things, once broken, can be made more beautiful in the restoration.